All right. So we are recording, and this will be made available sometime next week, I hope. I'll just have to get with our district secretary and figure out how we're going to do that. And so now that we know about questions, please, everybody, please mute yourselves except for the speaker. And that will help greatly, I think. I would like to recognize some of our guests this morning. Tom, real quickly, if I could do that. Our governor, our current sitting governor, Gary King, is here. Good morning, Gary. Thank you for joining us. Bob Roush, our district governor nominee, should be joining us, but I haven't seen him yet. Let me check. But he is scheduled to join us. Also want to welcome past District Governor Linda Woodward and past District Governor Doreen Kelsey. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it back over to you, and you've got the con.
As it were. I'd like to ask past District Governor Ken Howell from Boise. And by the way, if you've ever gone to Boise, you can't get there from here. But he's with us this morning to give us an update on polio and the things we might be wanting to do. Ken.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning to everyone, and especially good morning to you, Linda. I haven't seen you in quite a while, so it's nice to see you as opposed to just seeing your Facebook posts. And I hope wherever you may be, the weather is fine. The nice thing about Zoom sessions is we're generally all sitting in some nice warm room rather than being outside or having to travel all morning. So I am the End Polio Now Zone Coordinator for Zone 27. And what that means is I am responsible for working with all of the districts in Zone 27 and what remains of Zone 26 now. And I've had the pleasure just recently of being down in New Mexico. I was in Albuquerque on World Polio Day, or the week before World Polio Day. So it was my pleasure to come down and make a presentation to the Rotary Club of Albuquerque del Norte. And what I wanted to do this morning was give you a little presentation on polio. And I'm gonna skip over a lot of, not skip over, but I'm gonna run through the fundamentals very quickly because presumably and hopefully all of us on this call know something already about polio and Rotary's fight to eradicate that terrible disease. But as just a preliminary matter, I wanted to present some information that hopefully doesn't exactly cover the same old ground you're used to, but just sets the stage for us to talk about why the fight to eradicate polio continues to matter and why our efforts, especially those of us interested and focused on the foundation for polio eradication, continue to increase and maintain our efforts for the eradication of this disease. So the first thing I want to do is just talk about the agenda. We'll talk briefly about the history of polio, Rotary's involvement and how we've worked to eradicate it, the achievements we've had, why fundraising continues to be important and how are we using the donations, and how we can primarily get involved in this fight on a day-to-day and week-in-week-out basis. First, of course, let's talk about what is polio. And, you know, before I proceed, I'm looking at my screen kind of in presentation mode, and so it's going to be difficult for me to see a chat request. So if you see a chat, Tom, that you want me to answer, go ahead and just break in and interrupt me, and I'll try to answer that question. Otherwise, I'll be happy to, you know, address any questions you might have at the end. So let's talk about polio itself. What is polio? Well, the first thing, of course, is polio's been around a very, very long time. We know this from the archaeological record. This image of an Egyptian stele from 1580 BC, you can see the right leg of this individual is withered and contorted, and he has a big staff or a cane. And so the other kind of important clue is this is a priest in Egyptian history, and so we know they're probably a person of privilege and power, and that actually plays somewhat ironically into um, the, uh, the the transmission of polio, although it wasn't understood until many years later. But polio's been around humankind for probably all of our existence. We didn't know what caused polio until 1931, when three types of poliovirus were discovered. And it's easy for us to forget today what medical science was like before the early 1900s. You think Louis Pasteur did not really discover bacteria and the infectious agents until in the 1800s. And so it's only been fairly recently in our history that we have a scientific understanding of disease. So 1931 was when actually the polio virus was discovered. Before that time, it was kind of unknown how this disease was transmitted, how it was circulated, much about how to interrupt the transmission of it at all. So that's just not been very long in our history. These are the three types of polio. The good news is polio type 2 is eradicated. Just on World Polio Day, October 24, type 3 was declared eradicated. So now there's only polio type 1 in the world. Now, we aren't going to spend much time about the implications of the three different types of polio, but it does make a difference to us in the way we administer our vaccinations and what is in the vaccines that are given. It's a big, huge amount of work to transition from a vaccine that is trivalent or bivalent, meaning it addresses all three, or just two types of polio, to a monovalent. And currently the plan is we will not be changing the vaccine to a monovalent vaccine just for type 1, but we're going to continue to give the vaccine for type 1 and type 3. We eliminated the agents in the vaccination to address type 2 about 4 or 5 years ago. I want you to remember three important concepts about polio. First, world history, polio was endemic, meaning it was just everywhere in the environment. It never left us, and it was just constant low-grade circulation. However, the second concept is polio did not become epidemic until the 1800s. And so we didn't see these huge nationwide outbreaks of polio until the late 1800s. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The third most important concept about polio is that humans are the only host for the virus. And what that means is we can eradicate it by vaccinating and eliminating the disease in humans. We don't have to worry about it surviving in the environment for any length of time. It's actually quite fragile, can only last in the environment for a matter of about 6 weeks in the most optimal condition. But outside of the human body, it cannot survive, cannot reproduce. And so we don't have to worry about vaccinating animals or insects that might transmit it. It's just us. And so that does make this fight, as tough as it is, it makes the fight possible. So epidemics of polio, ironically, followed periods of increased sanitation. Before the late 1800s, most people contracted polio as an infant when they were still under the protection of their mother and mother's milk and the other instances of being very young infant. And when they contracted that disease as an infant, they gained immunity and typically did not have any incidence of paralysis or lifelong complications. But what did happen is they gained immunity. Sanitation, when we started as a society becoming much cleaner and had sewers and other developments that avoided exposure to fecal matter, is that infants weren't exposed and they didn't have immunity until much later in life. And the thing about polio is if you contract it as an adult or as an older child, it has the very serious side effects and complications of paralysis that we're aware of. So this was implemented or made evident by all of the epidemics that began in the early 1900s One of the most notorious early epidemics was the 1916 polio epidemic in New York. In this epidemic, starting in the city of New York and then ultimately circulating around the country, more than 20,000 people were paralyzed, and there were over 9,000 deaths from polio in that epidemic. And you can imagine the terror this disease caused in society at the time. You had a disease which, for all practical purposes, manifested itself as a cold. You'd be out feeling fine, and then you'd start to kind of get the sniffles and a headache and be a little achy. And the next day, you would be paralyzed. Now, not everyone was paralyzed by polio. Only a few cases out of 100 resulted in paralysis. And most people that got polio, they'd be sick for a day just with kind of cold symptoms, and then they were fine. But those that suffered more serious complications were very serious indeed, and did lead to deaths and did lead to lifetime complications. And of course, we've all seen this image, I think, of the iron lung and the treatment of paralyzed polio patients that aren't able to breathe on their own. But you need to think about this a little bit, is that the iron lung really wasn't developed until the early 1930s. So for many, many years in polio history, if you developed paralysis of the lung and weren't able to breathe on your own, you pretty much had a death sentence and you died. So the summertime epidemics continued, and then in 1921, something pretty important happened. This man, FDR. Yes.
Well, we all can sit around here, and you put the volume really high. You can hear us? 21
Is that a question, fella?
Oh, you see other people here?
No, I don't think that was a question. I think that somebody just checked in.
Okay.
And
All right. Well, I'm just going to continue to talk, and then maybe here in a minute we can get her to mute her microphone. FDR acquired polio, and because of his stature and prominence in the United States, it really put a spotlight on the disease. And you'll notice here in this image that he's actually got his leg braces on. And this is one of the rare images where FDR is actually shown in public, where you can see the leg braces. Most of the time, he did a very good job of kind of hiding that from the public. But before FDR developed polio, it was just a common, horrible disease that was circulating, but wasn't particularly prominent in terms of we've had a sense of urgency to eradicate the disease. And remember that in this same time period, there were many, many terrific, horrible diseases circulating. In 1913, the Spanish flu epidemic killed over 50 million people worldwide. So a disease such as polio that would kill a few tens of thousands in these big epidemics, while that's horrible, in contrast to things like the Spanish flu epidemics, which were going around killing many, many tens of millions of people, polio wasn't a disease that people focused on as much in their efforts for eradication as some others. But FDR did develop the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, later called the March of Dimes. And the historical significance of that effort to focus on polio is what led more or less to where Rotarians are today in our Polio Plus program. Now here's FDR, of course, and his law partner, Basil O'Connor, and Basil O'Connor went on to be the director of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, and their campaign did a couple of really important things. First, it raised a lot of money for the eradication of polio.
That's the host, Brian, what's his name? This gentleman, Ken Howell.
But the biggest thing that it did was it developed a new method of publicizing and focusing on polio as something to be eradicated. And so that spotlight on polio and the campaigns that they use was very, very impressive. If we had more time, I've got some videos of their actual campaign materials, which are very impressive and very powerful. And were we to have the same kind of public exposure of the fight to eradicate polio today, we'd be very prominent indeed in the public mind. But one thing that the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis did is fund all of Salk's research to find a vaccine to help prevent polio. And of course, in 1952, when Salk's vaccine was developed, it was big news worldwide, and people literally lined up vaccinated for the eradication of polio. Now, think about that. Here's 1952. We have a vaccine which works, is relatively inexpensive, can readily be administered it was administered in most developed countries very quickly. But from 1952 until 1985, there were many areas in the world where polio was still epidemic and where the vaccine was not routinely administered. So in 1985, following efforts of Rotarians in the Philippines in 1979 to eradicate polio, Rotary decided, hey, if the Rotarians in the Philippines can eradicate polio in an entire country, why don't we take it upon ourselves to eradicate polio worldwide? And that's what we've done. And since then, in going forward, we've been working to eradicate polio, and we've been very successful. Oops, wrong direction, sorry. Today, you can see on the left, the image, map of the world. All of the areas in red is where polio was still in 1985. And you can see on the right, the only two countries in red where polio is still circulating is Afghanistan and Pakistan. The little orangish color for Nigeria. Now we know that they've not had any cases of polio in the past 3 years. In fact, the entire continent of polio, or entire continent of Africa, has been polio free since the past 3 years. And efforts are underway by the Global Polio Eradication Initiative to declare that Africa is officially polio free. And we expect that declaration sometime in 2020, assuming that we continue all of the efforts we've continued to do in Africa and worldwide for vaccination and maintaining efforts to make sure polio doesn't come back. But Pakistan and Afghanistan are still areas of concern. Now, we're not doing this alone. We are, although we tout our work to eradicate polio as a Rotary initiative, it's actually an initiative of the Global Eradication Initiative. It's something Rotary very much got off the ground and got going and remains a vital force behind. But these are our partners. The Bill Gates Foundation, organization, UNICEF, CDC, and most importantly, many governments of the world who provide hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for the eradication of polio. And when we think about the work Rotary does to eradicate polio, we also need to remember these very, very important partners are counting on us. And when we finish this fight and we successfully eradicate polio, whatever it is we may do next in the world as a major project for Rotary, if we successfully complete this project, we will have the respect and support of our partners. And we must have that just to bolster our own reputation and to enable us to rely on these and other partners in whatever we choose to do in the future. So it's more than just, we've got to finish this fight because we said we would. We have to finish this fight to make sure that our partners stay with us and that we can rely on our partners in the future and we certainly want to be seen as a reliable partner to them. So these currently are the numbers for polio. You can see in 2019, this is just as of today, we have 96 cases of polio worldwide. All of those cases are in Pakistan or Afghanistan. Afghanistan has problems, but frankly, the incidence of cases in Afghanistan hasn't been as severe as it has been in Pakistan. And Pakistan's a problem, and we're going to talk about that. And you look at the numbers in the past few years and you think, boy, 2019 is just awful, and we're really sliding backwards. Well, we're still well under where we were just a few years ago. And if you look at the line for eradication, a graph for eradication of polio that goes back to 1985, it's virtually a flat line along the zero axis at the bottom. We're still in very, very low numbers worldwide. It is troublesome that they are increasing, but we know where they're increasing, we know why they're increasing, and we know that we can address those problems. So don't be discouraged unduly by the fact that the numbers are higher in 2019 than what they've been in the past few years. We're still winning this fight. We have to, the last few cases are always, we knew were always going to be tough. But this is where the numbers are as of today.
Hey, Ken, we have a question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Rafi Andonian asks, he says, a friend of mine who went to the nation of Niger in Africa into rural communities on an archaeology project said he saw many people affected by polio. His question is, are we tracking somewhere so that poor and rural as the remote areas, are we tracking somewhere so poor and rural as the remote areas of Niger? Or are those cases prior cases from years ago, but no longer active new cases?
We know from our statistics that they must be older cases. I don't know off the top of my head in Niger when the last active cases of polio were, but it's been a number of years. This is probably as good a time as any to talk about circulating vaccine-derived poliovirus cases. If the cases that he saw were current, it's possible that they were circulating vaccine-derived cases. But in many, many communities across Africa, it's easy to see victims of polio because, of course, this is a lifelong disease. Once you get it, there's no cure. It never goes away, and you really don't get any better, especially where they don't have any medical treatment to speak of. But there have been no active cases of polio in the entire African continent for the last 3 years. There have been cases of circulating vaccine-derived poliovirus cases, and what that means is that in very poorly immunized communities, the polio virus, which is contained within the vaccines that are given by the drops, circulate in the community, and the body actually excretes those polio viruses for a period of time after an individual receives the vaccines. And the effect, it's such a weakened version of the virus that the effect of that viral shedding is to actually provide additional protection in the community. The problem is that in communities where vaccination rates are so low that there are so many people at risk of polio, is that over time, the polio virus can mutate, and it mutates back into a form which that can cause paralysis. And so we know that some people worldwide get paralysis from of a mutated version of the virus that is contained in the vaccine. There is a solution to that problem, and the problem is to not give the drops, but to rather give injections. The problem is the technology simply doesn't exist, and the infrastructure doesn't exist in those communities to be able to transport and have the expertise to provide injections. And it has to be 100% because the injected virus is a killed virus and doesn't provide collateral benefits for vaccination. So you may hear someone say, well, the polio vaccination causes polio cases. That's not true. What causes the polio cases is that the community is so poorly immunized that over time the virus can mutate and become paralysis causing again. There's no plan to try to go to 100% injectable worldwide, because we just don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it. And the decision has been made that it's better to continue with up than it is to try to transition to a system for injections, because we would never be able to inject and provide immunizations to all of the people that we currently do. So that's a very, very long answer to your question, but no, Africa has not had any active cases of polio for the past 3 years.
Can I ask just a follow-up question? So I'm just curious. So how do we track in somewhere as rural as Niger, where, I mean, he was in some rural areas. I mean, some of the most rural and remote in the world. How would we track that and know that? I'm not questioning it from a skeptical standpoint. I'm just curious, like, just because of, that's so difficult to track. And I think that's one of the amazing things about our global network. But how do we get to those very rural areas outside of the main, outside of the major cities, say, even in a nation like Niger?
Yeah, what our the Global Polio Eradication Initiative does, and what our money as Rotarians and others pays for, is that monitoring and testing work. And whenever there is any indication that there have been cases of paralysis, within as short a time as we can get there, we have investigators that go in. We'll take community samples of the sewage. We have laboratories stationed in all of the major regions, including in Africa, in many communities, and they're all tested, genetically tested down at the DNA level to determine what is causing the paralysis. Is it polio? Do we need to go into a particular area with an emergency vaccination campaign? And those efforts happen day in, day out around the world. I can't give you a specific number in any particular area on how quickly they can get in and the testing efforts that they're doing locally, but that general process is what is done worldwide, and that's what our money pays for. We'll show you in a minute some detail on what our money that we provide to the polio fight is used for, and only like 6% of it is used for the cost of vaccinations. Most of what we're paying for is the infrastructure and testing and infrastructure efforts to eradicate polio. Okay?
Thank you.
You bet. So let's talk about some of our achievements. We are gaining progress. Polio cases reduced by 99% worldwide. A really great, heartwarming is that walking around our lives today that wouldn't be if we hadn't spearheaded and continued our fight for global polio eradication. 4 of 6 of the World Health regions are certified polio-free, and as soon as Africa is certified polio-free, that will be 5 of 6, leaving basically only Pakistan and Afghanistan remaining. Type 2 eradicated in 2015. We talked about type 3 being declared eradicated and no polio in Africa since September of 2016. So only 2 countries left, Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it's more than just providing polio vaccinations. In Pakistan, we also add measles. It's the same system, the same cold chain to keep the vaccine cool. So it's our efforts are supporting more than just polio. And in Nigeria, we also added yellow fever vaccinations to our efforts. So we're leveraging the infrastructure that we have in place. We still have challenges. This shot is a little whited out, but you can see they're vaccinating kids in boats on a river. And here, the picture on the right, you can see the polio vaccine worker buried up to her waist in a snowbank, carrying the little cooler next to her, trying to get to these remote villages to provide the vaccination. She's got a clipboard there. They gather all kinds of detailed information for record keeping on documenting what we're doing and the conditions that they find in the communities they're going to. We do continue to detect the polio virus in children in the environment. We're detecting it in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and that does give us some clue on where we need to focus our eradication and vaccination efforts. But we are monitoring elsewhere worldwide. Some of the more recent outbreaks in Afghanistan, we did see some evidence of the virus being present in Iran, which was a concern. Iran, fortunately, for all of their other issues, do have very good vaccination rates. And so the fact that the vaccine was, or the virus was detected there didn't turn out to be a problem. We know we still miss some children. Parents in conflict countries, geographically remote areas, sometimes are preventing them. The political commitment in communities like Afghanistan and Pakistan has been an issue. We think we're back on track now in Pakistan, but it is a problem. And when we say politics, we don't just mean government politics. There are community politics as well. There have been some instances in Pakistan where desire to immunize children as leverage to say, hey, if you're going to come in here and provide all of these vaccinations to our kids for polio, well, you know, we also need some other healthcare infrastructure. We need a hospital, we need a clinic. So we aren't going to let you vaccinate our kids until you agree to put in a clinic for us too. And that kind of work is probably, that kind of leverage is inconceivable to us, but that's what we're finding is going on in some of these countries. And so it's local political commitment as well. And financial resources are always an issue in maintaining this fight. So what do we still need to do? We need to maintain our immunization campaigns. We need to make sure that communities are engaged and that the communities actually desire what we're giving them. We continue to operate our labs and detect disease, even in those areas where polio isn't actively circulating, because we know it can come back if we don't maintain our diligence. We immunize up to 450 million children in 60 countries every year. When your members ask, why should we continue to raise as much money to eradicate polio as we have, or even more, when we know that we're only down to a few cases? Well, we aren't just immunizing in those few areas. We continue to immunize in over 60 countries every year. We provide funding to over 150,000 our laboratories. You can see in that last page on the right, collecting sewage to run through our testing laboratories. We continue disease surveillance activities in over 70 countries. So we still have this fight. End Polio Now is, of course, our main fundraising and public image campaign. I encourage you to spend a little time on the endpolio.org website. There's a huge amount of resources there just for information on polio that you can use in presentations to your clubs. And we can't forget our good friends at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And is that for every dollar they give, it becomes $3. So there's no other investment that you're going to see for your money in any charity that you give than this kind of matching opportunity. Rotary and Rotary Foundation asks that all clubs have a goal of $1,500 per year for Polio Plus. And we ask that the district itself give 20% of its district designated funds to the fight to eradicate polio. This year, those district designated funds are matched 1-to-1 from the World Fund, and then that total is matched 2-to-1 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, meaning for every dollar of DDF, it becomes $6. And I particularly want to thank past District Governor Linda for what she did in New Mexico to make sure that we received the maximum amount that we could, and it was greatly, greatly appreciated at the end of the year. This is how we use the donations. I mentioned vaccine costs are only 6% of the dollars that we spend. 52% is just spending getting the vaccines to the children. That's the cold chain, that's the manufacturing process, that's the distribution network. It's a huge amount of things back to the kids. We do provide about 21% just for raising awareness. And then you see a pretty big chunk of 15% for detecting disease and the 5% for experts. That's the laboratory support and the monitoring network. So it's a lot of money that we're spending overall for eradication of polio, but only a tiny fraction of it is actually used for the vaccine itself. It's our job to raise awareness. October 24th was World Polio Day. A lot of clubs did Pints for Polio or bowling pins for polio and other public outreach activities to make sure people were aware of disease around and what we do. So finally, I wanted to talk specifically a little bit about District 5520 and what you're doing. There's not good news there. As of yesterday, when I looked at the metrics online, 48 of your 68 clubs have set no Polio Plus goal. And we know from fundraising efforts of all stripes of the foundation that if you don't set a goal, you aren't going to meet a goal, and you don't have a benchmark to work against. So this is a number that District 5520 really needs to work on and encourage its clubs to set Polio Plus goals for fundraising. Remember that the Rotary Foundation asks that each club have a goal of $1,500 for polio eradication, and you don't have a goal if you don't set a goal. However, the other metric, which isn't terribly good, is that 37 of 68 clubs in 5520 made no contribution at all to polio in 1819, and I would hasten to add a big caveat. At least it wasn't recorded that way. So 37 of 68 clubs made no contribution to polio in District 5520. And that's a metric that you can easily improve, and I would encourage you very much so to do that. But here's the good news, is that of the clubs that did give, 1819 last year was 49, almost $50,000. And that's really a great number. So of the clubs that are giving, they're giving quite a bit, and that's good. And what that means is, if you can get your non-contributing clubs to add to that total ought to be a lot more than what it has been in the past. The other thing that District 5520 did was generously contribute its DDF to Polio Plus. Last year, they contributed, you contributed $23,310. And if that number was given again this year, that results in over $140,000 or about $140,000 to the eradication of polio by the time you go through the World Fund matching and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation matching. So great job last year on the DDF, and hopefully you will continue it again this year and multiply your money by 6 times. So I'm going to leave you with just this, which is to go to the endpolionow.org website. There's a ton of materials there for education, to be able, ideas for outreach, of course, links to donate, and all of this material can be purposed and directed and used by your clubs, both for its membership, but also to create outreach materials and talk to your community about our efforts to eradicate polio. Rotarians are committed to this fight, and we're willing and able to see it to the end. But to the extent we can, from non-Rotarians as well, we multiply our efforts. So I'm going to leave you with 2 thoughts. If polio exists anywhere, it can soon again be everywhere. And that's the real nasty part about polio. Clapping your hands together and say, what a great job we've done. We've got it down to this tiny, tiny number and we can walk away. The metrics show that if we give up our polio eradication efforts, within 10 years, there'll again be over 200,000 cases of polio in the world every year. It will come back that fast. And it's only a plane ride away. And we know from our news here in the United States that because of relatively concerning vaccination metrics in some communities, that there are likely those that aren't immunized in the United States. And if polio comes and is circulated in our communities, we can have substantial numbers of cases, even in the United States. And finally, inspiration from Bill Gates. As long as we never give up, polio doesn't stand a chance. I really believe that, and I hope you, as a Rotarian committed to polio eradication, believe it too. That's all I have this morning. If there are any remaining questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
I guess there are no questions there. Ken, thank you very much. Tom, back to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ken, for coming to us from Boise. I know you would have preferred the 2-day-long airline flights to get here, but we appreciate you being with us and giving us some things to think about. Mary McCambridge, who was supposed to talk about major gifts and so forth, is visiting her home in Arizona, and apparently it doesn't have internet. So we'll probably just wrap up with my Rotary 101 presentation. I can.
Ophelia, that was coming from you. I turned you. I muted your mic.
Oops. Okay.
Can you hear?
Okay. I'm going to share the screen now. Screen. Share. And file. Oh, okay. It's fighting back. So Bruce, do we have the presentation on the screen now?
Jeff, can you bring that up for us, please? Tom's?
I'm seeing it.
It's up.
Okay, all right. All right. I'm in presentation mode, which means I can't see anything else. So I want to thank you for taking the time this morning to come to annual foundation training. I'm Tom Walker, the district foundation chair, and I'm also the regional Rotary assistant, so I'm a zone guy too. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about some of the Rotary Foundation's programs and their sources of funding, global, which are formerly known as matching grants, and district, formerly known as simplified grants, as well as the current state of some foundation programs. Also, we're going to emphasize some reference materials that I just know that you're going to find helpful. And thanks to past District Governor Ken, we've heard about polio, so I'm going to skip through that part of it fairly quickly. About 10 years ago, the trustees, through the recommendation from the Future Vision Committee, adopted the motto, mission statement, and priorities of what was then called the Future Vision Plan. These were then approved and endorsed by the Rotary International Board of Directors in the 2007 Council on Legislation. The motto for the Rotary Foundation is doing good in the world, the famous words of past President Arch Klump from 1917. The mission of the Rotary Foundation is to enable Rotarians to advance world understanding, goodwill, and peace through the improvement of health, the support of education, and the alleviation of poverty. Based on the principal areas of the mission statement, the trustees of the Rotary Foundation and the Board of Directors of Rotary International have approved 6 areas of focus for the Rotary Foundation. Going forward, we'll discuss areas of focus later in the presentation. Now let's discuss the sources of foundation funding. As you might imagine, the funding for the Rotary Foundation, our foundation, comes primarily from Rotarians. Every Rotarian every year, or sometimes known by its abbreviation EREY or ERA, asks every Rotarian to give something every year with a worldwide average goal of $100 per Rotarian. A convenient way to accomplish your support of the Rotary Foundation is through Rotary Direct. Rotary Direct allows you to program your giving. Some people give every month, some people give quarterly, some semi-annually, some just once a year. The district asks also that each member consider contributing at least $25 to polio ratification. So this slide shows the basic Paul Harris Fellowship pin on the upper left. For each additional $1,000 given to the Rotary Foundation, a blue sapphire is added. Shown here in the center is a Paul Harris +5, representing a $6,000 contribution. For contributions above $6,000, a red ruby represents an additional $1,000. Shown here on the right is a Paul Harris +8, representing a $9,000 contribution. For actual monetary contributions totaling at least $10,000, major donor recognition is achieved. In the center there is a major donor level 1 pin representing a $10,000 contribution. A major donor level 2 recognizes $25,000 and has 2 diamonds. Major donor level 3 recognizes 50 with 3 diamonds, and major donor level 4 has 4 diamonds and represents $100,000. The wings at the bottom identify the wearer as a member of the Paul Harris Society, not to be confused with Paul Harris Fellow. These members pledge to try to give at least $1,000 a year to the Rotary Foundation. Giving to the annual fund, polio eradication, or global grants qualifies for meeting this commitment. Polio, you've already heard from Ken Howell. This is the map as it existed on the 10th of October. Notice all the red dots are up in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The green dots and the orange dots are the circulating cases that we had at that point. The Rotary Foundation provides humanitarian aid through global grants and district grants. Reminder, global grants require at least 2 clubs from different countries for that grant to go forward. District grants are done within the confines of District 5520. We have education programs supported by the Rotary Foundation. Primary among those are global scholarship grants as well as district scholarships. There are also centers for international studies that Rotary is set up with cooperating universities, as well as peace and conflict studies. Rotary Foundation also does cultural exchanges and global vocational training teams. Okay, I had to put this up. It's the simplest flow diagram that I could come up with. This chart will be on the test at the end. No, just kidding. But what you should take away from this is the World Fund funds and global grants and peace fellows, as well as
one of these sides away.
I think we got some feedback from somebody. And district designated funds fund these things down here in the lower left corner. The takeaway is our annual giving to the annual program fund goes to Rotary. They invest it for 3 years. The 3-year investment income primarily pays for most of the management costs, and then at the end of 3 years, half of it goes to the World Fund and half of it comes back to us as district designated funds. Another takeaway is 100% of our contributions support the charitable activities of Rotary. 50% comes back in the form of global matching grant, DDF. It's what the district uses to match club funds. It also sponsors district and global international grants, global and district scholarships, and so forth. And half goes to the World Fund. Up to 5% of the World Fund money may be retained by the Rotary Foundation to fund overhead should invested funds fail to generate sufficient interest to cover foundation operation. This began actually with my first day as governor, July 1 of 2015. The reason for this is you may recall in late 2000s, interest disappeared, and so we weren't getting as much of a return on the invested funds as we needed to. So the World Fund may be tapped for up to 5% if it's needed. District 5520 has not done a vocational training team nor a cultural exchange, and currently we are not doing district-funded district scholarships, although a number of clubs use their district grants for those scholarships. Also, we're not doing district-funded global scholarship, which would be somewhat akin to the old ambassadorial scholar program. Instead, clubs choose to sponsor and fund global scholarships, which the district supports with district designated funds, or DDF. The advantage of going that direction, and by the way, we're one of the few districts that does that, is that club-funded global scholarships can be processed much more quickly than district-funded ones. So let's look at this year's district grant program. 35 clubs were approved for district grants, and they were worth nearly $118,000, nearly $30,000 more than our previous high in the centennial year of 2016-17. Unlike the older program, district grants don't have to be matched by the club. Some examples of grant projects that have been requested: supporting food banks, backpack programs, scholarships of various sorts. Indy and Elmer are very popular, as is Dolly Parton. There are various tutoring programs. One club asked to sponsor a soapbox derby. There are a lot of literacy and numeracy tutoring programs. Another club asked to build an ADA compliant cabin for the YMCA. In global grants, as of the 13th of October, there were 35 district clubs involved in 26 global grants addressing all 6 of the areas of focus. These 26 grants are worth about $2.2 million. Also, we have 4 grants worth about $193,000 awaiting approval. The 6 areas of focus obviously address all of mankind's greatest needs. As you can see, District 5520 and its clubs are very active in global grants. And there's a big long list of the clubs that were involved at that point. I would point out that at the recent Zone Institute, District 5520 was 3rd in Zone 20, the old Zone 27, for club participation in the grant program.
Hey, Tom, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Jose Luis Salas asks that will this PowerPoint that you're showing us be available to train our members who are not able to attend?
Yes, it will. And as an aside, a basically sanitized version of this will be available for assistant governors should they want to use it. So.
Okay. A second question from Jose. He also asks is that to assist with polio and raising funds, with the efforts to raise funds, is there a specific process I'm assuming as the club, need to follow and or forms to fill out to ensure that the funds go to this effort? And I think the answer there is it depends on how you do it, but they can choose to send it to Polio Plus.
Well, again, whether or not you're using just the multiple donor form or the individual donor form, you check where you want it to go. And in the next presentation, there's a related discussion, but basically that's how you do it. What I will say is what happens sometimes, and Kim kind of tap danced around it, is sometimes the money is collected, and about every year something like this happens. We forget, the club will forget what that extra money is for. And sometimes maybe if you have a new secretary or treasurer, they don't remember what the money was collected for, and oh, it's going to the foundation. Well, I like polio, and so the annual money will end up being earmarked for polio, or vice versa. So things like that happen. There is a way to correct that if we catch it in time. Is anything else? Okay, let's move on. Let's take a look at an example of a current global grant. And this shows how we can leverage our money with a global grant. This project, Purified Water at Your School, provides clean water at Monclova schools, and that's in Chihuahua, Mexico. And it's sponsored by the Rotary Club of Santiago del Monclova. If there's money, the districts match their club dollar for dollar, and the foundation matches districts dollar for dollar, and they match clubs 50 cents on the dollar. So if you work the math, your $1 participation turns into $3.50 for your project. Now, a common misconception is that a club must have a lot of money to make a difference by participating in a global grant. First, if you'll notice here, we have 8 clubs teamed up to bring clean water to the Monclova schools. Secondly, you'll notice that District 5520, so-called Club 4, contributed $250. Now, compared to the $36,000 project size, $250 doesn't sound like much. But let's look at the Rotary math, where the club's $250 is matched by the district's $250 of the district designated funds. And then the World Fund matches the district's $250 with another $250 and matches the club's $250 with another $125. So the original $250 has matches from the district and the World Fund that brings it up to $875. So by my way of thinking about it, that's some bang for the buck. So even with relatively small amounts of money, you can make a difference. These are the 6 areas of focus that the trustees identified for the current grant structure. They reflect critical humanitarian issues and needs that Rotarians are already addressing worldwide. They align Rotary with other international development efforts and strategically further the foundation's mission. Each of these areas has specific goals associated with the area in question, as well as criteria that have to be met to satisfy the Rotary Foundation. And you'll notice there are 3 of them here with asterisks. The Rotary Foundation trustees recently changed the names. The peace building one, they added conflict resolution. Hygiene was added to water and sanitation, or WASH. And community was added to economic development. Let's talk about peace. That's one of the original things in the mission of the Rotary Foundation. There's a 2-year master's level study conducted at 5 universities right now. It's Duke and is paired with the University of North Carolina, International Christian University in Tokyo, University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, University of Queensland in Brisbane, and Uppsala University in Sweden. And there's also a 3-month certificate study at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. I should point out that the Rotary Foundation plans on adding additional participating universities in the coming years. Over time, Zali Poland from Santa Fe went to both Chulalongkorn short course back in the 2000s and the 2-year course at Bradford University. Recently, Hobbs sponsored Mina Murillo to attend Chulalongkorn short course in the spring of 2018. Jacqueline McAllister just started at International Christian University in Tokyo this past fall for the 2-year course. And Catherine Hughes Fredig has just been approved to go to Chulalongkorn for the short course starting in February of 2020. These programs select only about 100 or so candidates a year in a worldwide competition. Needless to say, the slots in these programs are very highly priced, so it's quite remarkable that District 5520 has had candidates selected in 3 successive years. So we're very active in peace studies here. Just in case you want to figure out and contact the foundation team, here are the key players. I'm the foundation chair. Peter Fowley is the district grant chair. He also is the one that manages the district grant program. If you're interested in global grants or have questions about that, Rafi Andonian from Santa Fe is the guy you want to talk to. And our polio plus chair is Earl Wade of Rio Rancho. Earlier, I mentioned resources that you're going to want to take a look at. The first one, of course, is the Rotary Foundation Reference Guide. This is updated periodically and is available as a download. And as president of my club, I printed off a copy for each of my board members. And I gave them a copy, and as governor, all the assistant governors and incoming presidents got a copy. If we take a look here at the table of contents, you'll see what is in it. It's not terribly long, but most of the basic questions you're going to have about the Rotary Foundation are answered in this pamphlet. Again, you can download this from the RI website, and it is updated periodically. You may or may not be aware that as of July 1, District 5520 was rezoned into Zone 26. Zone 26 is paired with the new Zone 27. One of the amazing things is that our new combined zones have a wonderful website with lots of information. And I would point you to and suggest that you bookmark zone2627.org. It's got just an amazing amount of stuff on it. And in particular, I'm pointing out the Foundation Reference Guide in polio video. This is
Hey, Tom, I have another question for you.
Yes, sir.
Past District Governor Doreen Kelsey asks, she said, this goes back to the grants information that you had previously. She said, in the past, the host district had to provide at least 50% of the grant funding. Has that policy changed?
For global grants, at least 30% of the money must come from outside of the host country. That's the way it used to be a long time ago before District 5520 got involved and figured out how to game the system. At that point, it went up to 50% of the money had to come from outside. So right now, 30% of the money has to come out from outside of the host country.
Okay, so it could be more than 50%. Let's see, the host district, is it going to be at least 50% then?
I think I asked the question incorrectly, Bruce. It was the opposite. The host club couldn't provide more than 50% of its own funding for a grant.
Oh, okay.
And in that example, it looks like they're providing more than 50%. Maybe that's changed.
Well, if you take a look at many of the projects that we're doing right now, the majority of the money comes from the project that we have in Gallup. The majority of the money comes from the United States. It's, by the way, it's harder to come up with money outside of the country. So that's why they've gone back to 30%. Anyway, on the Zone 2627 website here, we have the table of contents. This thing is about 18 pages long, and we kind of scroll through here. You see all these little blue links. Remember Rotary Direct that I talked about? There's the form presentation if you want to do that, so forth. International Paul Harris Society, the various donor programs, club banners if you're into banners, how to use foundation recognition points. That used to be how to read the reports. Lots of hyperlinks. The Big West, by the way, that's what we're calling ourselves now. the Big West. Well, if you imagine, our zone runs from east of Lubbock to Honolulu, so I guess we're probably Big West. Anyway, don't use this link for me. They got my real address is FT Walker, R with a 1 as opposed to an N. They're working on fixing that. So this I would bookmark as well as the zone website. Lots of stuff on there. Okay, another report. We are required to have the annual Foundation Committee report. This is available on the district website under the Rotary Foundation. And I'm hoping that nobody's in there. This is what it looks like. It summarizes the activities of the Foundation Committee for the year prior. This is for the 18-19 year. Talks about how much DDF we had and what we did with it. Lists all the global or district grants from last year, who got them and for how much. Lists the global grants that was started and completed last year. Talks about giving and per capita and all that stuff. By the way, last year we set a record of $176,000 in endowment fund giving. And if you look down here, we got a bunch of awards at Zone 27's Zone Institute, including number 3 in club participation and district grants, other giving, which is for us primarily global grants. We are number 1. Endowment fund giving, we are number 1. Annual fund giving, number 2 in total, as opposed to per capita. So I would suggest that if you need some material to do a presentation, you might want to look at this. Again, this is available on the district website under the Rotary Foundation, and you don't even have to log in. Another thing, if you are sleep deprived and don't want anything habit forming, it's a thing called the Financial Management Plan. This basically lays out how the Foundation Committee manages the money, and it lists all the procedures and so forth, and it's non-habit forming, I guarantee you. But you may want to look at what's called Addendum 1, the club funding plan. This is the basically detailing how the district grant program works. And Addendum 2 talks about things associated with the global grants. By the way, you will see here in the current year, we're matching up to $15,000 of district club contributions. So that's where that's laid out. Again, available on the district website under the Rotary Foundation. Are there any questions that I haven't heard yet?
Yeah,
Well,
at this point, you can unmute and you can ask your question.
well, if there aren't any, I know you're all eager to find out about next year's district grant program. So let me move on into that presentation here. So what we're talking about now is the general procedures and where the numbers come from for next year's district grant program. I already gave you the numbers on the current year. So district grant funding is based on the annual program fund giving 3 years prior. So since we're talking about 2021 or FY21, this would come from giving during the 2017-18 Rotary year or FY18. During that year, district and its clubs and members contributed to nearly 282,000. You see it there, 281, 981, 52 to the annual fund. But that year was the Rotary Foundation started something which I'll call annual program fund area focus giving. And we had 18 of our clubs and their members contributed about $13,600 to that. The annual program fund area focus funds are spent immediately and therefore do not generate interest. And having already been spent, they are not available to generate district designated funds or DDF for the FY21 Rotary year. So effectively then, the district's annual giving for share was $268,360 and change instead of the nearly 282,000. So we'll have about 268 to work with as starting out. Now, according to SHARE program, half of our giving goes to generate DDF and the other half goes to the World Fund. So our DDF from FY18 is half of the 268,363, or about 134,181.90. And I'll tell you right now, as I explain the next part of it, that's the number, and I'm not going to attempt to figure out how the Rotary Foundation rounded it. So the balance that goes to the World Fund is a similar number, but not quite the same. 87 cents instead of 90 cents. Okay. Now, according to the Foundation's grant program, the district may request up to 50% of our DDF for the district grant program, and 50% of the 134,000 is about 67,091 about. So this year being FY21, the district grant funding will consist of three parts. The first is 1/4 of our annual giving, or about $67,091, as we previously described. Secondly is the second year of a special foundation program that allows us to use 1/10 of the DDF carry forward as of July 1 of 2018. At that point, we carried forward $172,564 and change. So 1/10 of that means that we will apply $17,256 and change to our district grant. The third portion is half of the endowment funding for FY21. The endowment includes both interest on the endowment and specially constructed donor advised funds, which yield endowment earnings to the district. And that, based on the current year, we won't know what the real number is until July, probably, is if it's the same or better. It's about $7,450. If we add all that up together, and again, these are kind of approximate numbers, we'll have about 92,000 to work with. Now, at this point, I should point out that the district is allowed to withhold up to 3% of the total for administration, which in District 5520, that's mostly the annual subscription to the Club Runner Grants module, which the last time I looked was about $1,100. However, the district has elected to pay for the grants module from district funds already existing in the district grant account, so that we can maximize the district grant program. So by now, you've had enough of numbers and you're really thinking, how much money or is my district grant going to be? Okay, the amount of your district grant is based on two things. First, your club's giving back in FY18, the 17-18 Rotary year. This determines your baseline. And secondly, whether or not your club achieves $100 per capita in annual giving this year, not next year. So, assuming your club is eligible, the baseline is yours regardless of whether or not you achieve $100 per capita this year. Recognize that we won't make out a check for less than $250. Your baseline is simply 15% of your FY18 annual giving in this case. So now the question is where did 15% come from? Remember that half of annual giving is turned over to us as DDF, and half of that half is available for district grants. So the district applies 60% of the half toward your baseline. And the remaining 40% goes to what we call the pot. Okay. So 15% is, if you take a half times a half, that's 25%, and 60% of 25% is 15%. And the remaining 40% goes to the pot. So the question now becomes, you're asking, I can hear your brains working. How much money did we give, and what's my district or my club's baseline? This document is called FY21 baselines. It's available on the district website under the Rotary Foundation. It lists by club what the actual annual program fund giving was, how much each club had in this annual or area focus giving, and adds back in the donor advice stuff, because that doesn't count against us with the effective share, and 15% of that is listed as your baseline. So you can download this document and see. One of the things I wanted to show you is this 281, 981 is back again. That's what we got credit for annual giving in that year, but our share number will be 268, 363, because about 5% of our giving went to area focus. Again, this document is available on the district website. So we know what the baseline is now. Let's address the rest of it. There is the pot previously mentioned, which is 40% of the 25%, or 10% of the total giving. And then there's sweep up. The pot is supplemented by the sweep up, and sweep up is all of the unclaimed baseline funds. And the baseline may be unclaimed because the club is untrained. The club didn't apply, believe it or not, that happens sometimes. The club isn't eligible because it's not current on its RI dues or district dues. It's not current on its IRS 990. It's not current on district or global grant reporting. Or for some reason it's not in good standing. Or lastly, because the club didn't achieve $100 per capita this year, and their baseline from 3 years ago is less than $250. So what do you have to do to access the pot? And the pot is typically the larger portion of the district grant money. Each club, regardless of size, that achieves $100 per capita will be eligible for an equal share of the pot in the sweep up, assuming they're eligible. So what is $100 per capita based on? Go take a look at your membership number as of July 1, 2019 and multiply by 100. And that's what it takes to get $100 per capita. Now, how big is a typical share of the pot in the sweep up? The problem is we don't know how many clubs will achieve $100 per capita. As of today, there are only 2. So for most, we won't know until the end of June. And also, we don't know yet how many clubs will apply. So it's not possible to give an exact figure. However, historically, a share of the combined pot sweep up is typically at least $2,000. So let's take a look at some examples here to see how this works. First example, we have a club of 10 members that back in FY18 gave $1,750. We'll assume that they still have 10 members, but this year they did not achieve $100 per capita. So the baseline for this club of 10 would be 15% of $1,750 or $262. Because they did not achieve the $100 per capita, they will not share in that $2,000. So they would receive a grant of $262.50. We'll round it up to $263. Second example is the same club gave same amount. This time, though, they did achieve $100 per capita, and they have those same 10 members, so they gave at least $1,000. So they get the baseline plus an equal share of the pot, which is typically at least $2,000. So they would be looking at a district grant of roughly $2,200 at least. Next example, we have another club of 10 members that gave nothing in FY18, but they've seen the light and they have those same 10 members and they average $100 per capita, which means they gave at least $1,000. So because they didn't give anything, there is no baseline, but they do share in the pot of $2,000. So this is a way you can make up for a bad year of giving. A fourth example is one of our larger clubs of 110 members, and let's say they gave $21,000 in FY18, and they're still at 110. And they achieve $100 per capita this year, which means they gave at least $11,000. So their baseline is 15% of 21,000 or 3150. Excuse me, at least 3150, and they share in the pot. So they're looking at a district grant of $5,100 or $5,200. Again, reference materials, this document called District Grant Basics is on the district website again, and basically outlines the procedure. Okay, you can do this. Here we go. That we're going to be using, and the numbers are a little bit different because we've refined the numbers since then, but lays out what you have to do, the numbers and so forth. Again, this document is available on the website and we'll help walk you through it. The financial management plan, again, addendum 1 is something you're probably going to want to look at for the district grants. Are there any questions?
This is Gary.
Yes.
When I've been talking to people about grants, I've been telling them that one of the mandatory things that they had to have given something to the foundation 3 years ago, but I'm looking at that one example that you had. Is that not quite true anymore as long as they trade?
Well, giving to the foundation is in essence a prerequisite. Whether they did it 3 years ago, or hopefully they would do it both 3 years ago and this current year. Obviously, the emphasis of the $100 per capita this year is number one, it'll get up their baseline for future years, and it will allow a way of making up for a bad year of giving a couple of years ago.
Okay, I mean, I think that's probably good. So I was just thinking maybe at some point in time in the past, it was like mandatory that they had given something. So for instance, the El Paso Zaragoza Club hasn't existed. So they don't show any giving from 3 years ago because they didn't do this. So they can still qualify for a grant.
Yes.
Under this, as long as they make.
And is that district grant basics document addresses what if I'm a club that didn't exist back then?
Yeah.
And so what we do is basically assign an arbitrary baseline of 249, which is less than 250, by the way. So if they give $100 per capita this year, they'll get the 249 plus a share of the pot.
So Ophelia, if you're still on, that applies to you guys, I think. Saw that Ophelia was logged on earlier on. So otherwise, I'll get back to the club and make sure.
Yep. And I do apologize, Mary McCambridge, and I've got a presentation, but we're already past 10:30. So we'll post the major giving up there along with these slides, and we'll address those issues later. Are there any other questions? I'm surprised on the district grant thing, but Bruce, is that it?
I think it is. Thank you, Tom. I just want to let me thank everybody who attended our training today. And we did record this presentation, so it will be available hopefully sometime next week on the district website, and we'll get an email out on that as soon as I can figure out how to do that. And but I think we'll be able to get a copy of this out available to you, and you can access it through the district website. Okay, with that, I think we're done. I thank you for joining us, and you all have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce and Tom. This was a great presentation, and Ken too. He may be logged off.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
everybody,
you.
have a good weekend.
And remember, we answer phone calls and emails, and occasionally travel. So.
Bye, Tom.
Bye, Tom. Bye, Bruce. Bye, Mr. Key.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
All right. I think I will beam out.
Okay, very
Thanks,
good.
guys.
Okay. Oh my God, who is that? Mute it.
And music.
Okay. Oh.
Ophelia, I think that's coming from your microphone.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. We'll get off the phone right now.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, Brian. Bye-bye.
Bye, Bruce.
You bet. Jeff, you still there? No. Okay.
Bruce,
Yeah.
are you going to have a Cliff Notes version of this for us within a week or so?
What I'll have is a video. That's as far as I go on that. That you, Rich?
Step up. All right.
Oh, Ed. Oh, yeah. That's what we're going to provide, Ed.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thanks.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.